I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, you fool, you will be liable to the hell of fire. That's ominous, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure that we all managed to get through the holiday season without saying, you fool, to any of our loved ones, right? Maybe not all of us. By way of confession, I should probably say that I certainly thought such things over vacation, and once or twice my response to a statement from someone else might have implied that I did in fact think they were fools after all. This part of the Sermon on the Mount has at times been hard for many of us, even in good times. And much of the time these days it can be more difficult than usual. The presidential transition nationally and issues of racism, sexism, and civil rights both nationally and locally have strained many relationships within families and churches and friend groups and neighbors. Even as we seek the opportunity to work for a better world, we find ourselves picking around sensitive topics with varying levels of success, trying to avoid a potential explosion of anger, our own or someone else's. But there is also such a thing as righteous anger, isn't there? Which is to say that there are, in fact, times when anger is exactly what we need to feel. There's an internet meme going around, most frequently attributed to Benjamin Franklin, but most likely not said by him, to the effect that, with slight variations depending on where you find it, to the effect that justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are affected. Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are affected. Outraged. Even the great cloud of the internet knows that some anger, some outrage is a natural part of living an authentic life. If we are to be open to others and affirming of diversity, as our faith tells us to, we must try. No doubt imperfectly, but as perfectly as we can, we must try to walk in someone else's shoes, to see and hear with someone else's eyes and ears the bullying voices on Twitter or in the public square or in homes or in schools, the painful cries of the poor and the dreams deferred by institutions that create barriers for those arbitrarily deemed unworthy. And when we do this, when we see and hear the powerful ignoring the powerless, we are rightly outraged by what we witness. These feelings of frustration and anger may in fact be what energize us to act, to speak, to march, and to organize, to make some noise based on the depth of our conviction. In these times, our anger even strengthens us to endure the anger of others directed at us. Now, we see both kinds of anger in the life and work of Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was angry about a lot of things. And we know from history that he generated a violent, angry response from his opponents and sometimes even frustration from his friends. With the advent of the Martin Luther King Day, society sometimes now tries to bend towards a natural tendency to want to clean up his legacy, to create a two-dimensional icon, sort of the friendly, accessible face of social justice, when in reality, King worked from deep convictions. Convictions that placed him outside the conventional margins of respectable life. He chose not to adapt to his surroundings, to the norms and mores of his fellow citizens, because he felt they were wrong. And that made people angry. Now, when anyone chooses not to adapt, people try to expel them, label them an aberration. And maybe that's why he embraced that term, maladjusted, in both of our Martin Luther King readings today. There are certain things in our nation and in the world, he says, to which I am proud to be maladjusted. I say very honestly that I never intend to adjust myself to segregation and discrimination. And then he goes on. I never intend to adjust myself to religious bigotry. I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few. I never intend to adjust myself to the madness of militarism, to self-defeating effects of physical violence. Maladjustment and anger may actually be an inevitable part of the life of faith, both as a byproduct and a motivator. But here's the thing. No one wants to be that way all the time. Anger is not a place where a person can sustain a life, where one can retain a sense of humanity and of health. It is not a way to prepare for a long struggle. Some of the most committed activists I know can tire themselves out with anger. It's an easy thing because there is always one more thing to do. Which is why we seek something more. Something deeper for this work of radical equality. It is why leaders like King have always tried to draw on something else for spiritual sustenance. He was a pastor and a theologian after all, and that is a group who should, though we don't always manage it, who should base what we do on something other than partisan necessity. We must base our actions on deeply held convictions rooted in faith. So on this Martin Luther King Day, after what has turned out to be a series of sermons in this church about current events in the just life, it is worth taking one more moment to consider another emotion. One that can lift us up even in the darkest times. One that is a part of every honest and true religion. One we hear about in the words of Paul. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels and have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Or if you prefer, the words of our first hymn, based on those words of Paul. Though I may speak with bravest fire and have the gift to all inspire and have not love, my words are vain as sounding brass and hopeless gain. Love, not anger, is where justice starts. It is where faith begins too. It calls us to see not just our own needs, but the needs of others. It calls us to action. Now here I'm talking about love in the church sense. You all get that, right? Not just romantic love or love for our family or our friends or our pets, but that other kind, which is to say divine love, which brings us together. It is what brings us to understand that, in King's words, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. So what do we do? How do we find it? How do we take time off from answering our darker emotions in service to the good? or perhaps more pressingly for some of us, how do we keep from avoiding our emotions by avoiding our call to serve? I know that the specifics will be different for each of us. However, in general, our needs are the same, because we are all humans. To find this love, the one that has motivated the great prophets from any era in human history, both sacred and secular, to find this love, we must discover ways to see our whole lives, not as smaller boxes in one large box, not as a series of reactions and roles in specific contexts, not as an existence that can be compartmentalized with us behaving one way in one place and a different way somewhere else, but instead living lives that are seamless, with each of our identities overlapping with and logically following from and motivating the rest. So how do we do that? Well, we don't ever probably get it 100% right, do we? But we do get closer if we practice. We do get closer with mindfulness. And we do it with the support of those we love and those who love us. We do it by finding and founding communities committed not just to action but to reflection. And not just to reflection, but to action. Places like this Eliot Church of Natick, Massachusetts, where we frequently hear the words of the great universalist Hosea Ballou, who reminds us that if we agree in love, there is no disagreement that can do us any injury. But if we do not, he says, no other agreement will do us any good. Remember last week when we talked about the idea in the church that God's role, and by extension our role, and the church's role, is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable? Any of you remember that? It's okay if you don't. But it's a pretty common belief in the liberal church. And it's important. It is important. What is important in that statement is that dynamic, one where we are supported and encouraged, comforted, in our personal journeys, just as we are called and challenged to hear and respond to uncomfortable truths. This is a time in our history as individuals and as a people when we must commit ourselves to this relationship and conversation, when we must risk ourselves in love for the good of others, for the betterment of humanity, and the improvement of our community and ourselves. Amen.